First of all, I want to thank everyone for coming out tonight and joining us for this discussion. Jim Cameron was actually suggested to the Board of Selectmen by a resident who heard of his presentation and suggested it might be a good fit for Old Lyme. And I have to tell you right now, I've attended meetings recently, as I'm sure Representative Carney, I'm happy to see you join us here tonight, Devin, has attended meetings about transportation in Connecticut and some of the challenges that we have. And I have to tell you, they're numerous. We really are hearing a lot of challenges for all communities from the state, not only on transportation, but other funding that we get from the state. So it's a timely discussion, and I think an important one, and something that those of us who are in government are dealing with all the time and trying to figure out how to meet these challenges. I'd like to point out that Jim Carney, our guest speaker tonight, was interviewed for an article that was published in The Day last week, Proposed Cuts to Bus Districts, Shoreline East Create Concern. And I have to tell you, for those of us who lead our towns, these are major concerns for us. To cut Shoreline East, the main rail that we use to connect us to New Haven and to New York City and Boston, it just doesn't make sense, not at all. And when you look at how we deal with transportation in small communities, we have now Ninetown Transit that serves small communities very well. And they are experiencing cuts, as well as our Council of Governments, which is 17 towns that come together to deal with transportation. So this is an integral part of what we do as CEOs of the towns, and we are all very concerned about it. So it's a timely discussion. It was a great suggestion by this resident, and we decided to take her up on it and invite Jim Cameron to be here. So Jim, first I want to thank you for being here, and now I am going to do the honor of introducing your impressive resume. So Jim was born and raised in Toronto. He's been fascinated with trains since his childhood. I have a 2-year-old grandchild who's fascinated with trains too. So maybe this is a prediction. After attending Lehigh University, he worked in broadcasting and journalism in Hartford, Boston, and New York City. Moving back to Connecticut in 1992, his choice of a home was dictated by proximity to rail, settling in Darien within walking distance of the Norton Heights station. In 1993, he joined the Connecticut Metro North Rail Commuter Council, where he served 11 years as vice chairman and 4 years as chairman, resigning in 2013. Since 2003, he has authored a weekly newspaper column and blog, Getting There, which appears each Monday in the New Haven Register and 5 other Hearst daily newspapers across Connecticut. And he's also on our own line, Talking Transportation. He serves on the Darien Representative Town Meeting, runs his town's Channel 79 government TV station, and also serves on the Area 9 Cable Television Council. To update us on our state's transportation crises, please welcome Jim Cameron.
Thank you very much. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah.
I don't think we need the PA system. I used to work in radio, so I know how to project. But if you can't hear me, just shoot your hand up, let me know. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation to be up here tonight. I see some friends in the audience, Greg Stroud and folks from Southeast Coast who have been just incredible in their leadership at fighting the federal government's attempts to ramrod high-speed rail through your historic district. We're working with him now to try to stop the same thing from happening in Lower Fairfield County. I'm going to go through some PowerPoint. I got some charts, some graphs, and if you want a copy of any of these slides, I have business cards over there. There's a sign-up list. Just shoot me an email. I'll be happy to send you a copy. I'm going to sit down so you can see the screen. And as I go through this, if you have any questions, put your hand up. I think we can get through all this in a relatively short period of time. So I'm a columnist for the Hearst newspapers, and a columnist is a little different than being a journalist, although I was a journalist, and I try to bring journalism to my reportage. My hero is Thomas Friedman, who's the columnist for the New York Times, and I agree with him that what we are is we're either in the heating business or the lighting business. Lighting being enlightening people, heating being getting you pissed off enough that you engage with the decision makers. So I hope we have a little bit of both this evening. I'm also a commuter advocate, and as we mentioned in the introduction, I served on the Metro-North Commuter Council for 19 years. Go out and talk about transportation issues. My portfolio has expanded beyond just rail now, in that I'm trying to look at the larger issues of getting there from point A to point B. So here is Lower Fairfield County, the heart of the transportation crisis, and we'll get to your neck of the woods, I promise, as well too. So the red line along there is Metro North and I-95. The green line is the Merritt Parkway. And the blue lines, as you see, which go up to New Canaan, Danbury, and Waterbury, are what are called the branch lines of Metro North. The other branch line that the DOT is responsible for is Shoreline East, which runs from New Haven to New London. Mostly Old Saybrook, but a few trains go to New London. Here's a rather stylized map of the same rail structure. And as you can see, the red line represents the trains that go all the way up to New London, that's Shoreline East. And the branch lines, there's a new branch of rail service, commuter rail service, which will be starting in the spring, which will run from New Haven to Hartford and on to Springfield as well too. How we're starting a new rail service at a time we're talking about shutting down others, we'll get to that, promise, okay. The juxt of the crisis that we're dealing with here deals with what's called the Special Transportation Fund. Money goes into that fund from gasoline taxes, the gross receipts tax on petroleum, license and permit fees, DMV fees. Something new that's been added this year, 25 cents for every Uber or Lyft ride goes into the Special Transportation Fund. And occasionally money comes in from the general fund, although it usually goes in the opposite direction. Expenses, 40% of all the money that we spend on transportation is paying debt service on bonds that we've issued. The rest of the money goes to DOT operations, repairs, snow plowing, etc., pensions, direct aid to the towns, state police patrols. Those are the other expenses. And the problem is the Special Transportation Fund is running out of money. Here's the same representation going up to 2022 on the far right-hand side. The DOT operations are shown in blue. The purple top part there on each of those was special funding that was set aside by the governor for what's called Let's Go CT. That was the initial part of his 30-year, $100 billion plan, and I say plan with air quotes because I didn't think it was a plan as much as it was a laundry list of different projects. But here's the crisis. The Special Transportation Fund is running out of money. Starting in 2019, it's going to be moving into the red. And by the year 2022, it's going to be $337 million in deficit, which means that there are all kinds of projects that will not be paid for. This crisis was identified several years ago as an impending sword of Damocles hanging over DOT. And the legislature, not to pick on Devin over here, but the legislature kind of kicked that can down the road, as it has with a number of different issues. But more recently, the governor drew this to everybody's attention by saying the state cannot go to Wall Street looking for bonding for anything. Transportation, water quality issues, housing, or anything, if this Special Transportation Fund is known to be going into the red. So what's the problem with the Special Transportation Fund? Gasoline tax revenues are down because cars are getting better mileage, more people are using electric cars. There are some estimates that in 20 years, half of all the cars on the road will be electric. They won't be paying a gasoline tax. The other problem is that the gasoline tax was lowered in 1997 by the legislature by 14 cents a gallon. Very politically popular move, but the bills are coming due. And because we lowered that gasoline tax 20 years ago, we have lost $3.7 billion that would have gone into the Special Transportation Fund to pay for all the projects that we need. Representative Carney was in middle school, I think, when that occurred. In middle school. Okay, good. Can't blame him. But I'm looking for the list of who voted for that. When that came up 20 years ago, I said, what are you doing? Well, nobody wants to pay a gas. Of course they don't want to pay a gasoline tax. But if you told them where this money goes to, why not put a sticker on every pump? So as you're standing there watching the meter tick over, you know that the money is being spent on the roads and the rails and maintenance and bridges instead of going into some black hole up in Hartford. The other problem is that our gasoline tax is static. It has not changed. It is not pegged to inflation, which has gone up. In general, here's where the heat comes in, folks. I think gasoline is far too cheap in this country. It's too cheap. So in Connecticut, down where I live, it's about $3 a gallon. In my home country, 25% more. In the Netherlands, twice as much, plus a little bit. So I think if we peg the price of gasoline to the true cost, we would be collecting more in terms of tax revenue at least. In other words, what we're looking at is that we cannot rely just on a gasoline tax to fund the Special Transportation Fund. It's not going to be enough money. The other problem is that the Special Transportation Fund is more of a sieve than it is a piggy bank. It has been a very attractive target for raiding whenever the state budget needed to be balanced. And this is not just Malloy, who promised he would never do that. This was Roland and Rel and all of the predecessors. They have regularly dipped into the Special Transportation Fund to the tune of about $400 million just in the past 10 years. So they take that money out, they use it to balance the budget, and it's not there to be spent on transportation. So here's a couple of recent withdrawals, 2017, 2014, a lot of money. So the question is, why don't we make the Special Transportation Fund be a lockbox? Make it impossible or really hard to take money out of that Special Transportation Fund so that we know, and you know when you're paying your gas tax and others, that that money is going to be spent on transportation. That idea has been kicking around. It was actually suggested 4 years ago by State Rep Gail Lavielle, a Republican from Wilton. It has been embraced by others, and it's coming up to a referendum vote in November. So you'll have a chance to vote on this. Now, there's some debate about whether the proposed lockbox is locked up tight enough, but I've spoken to the commissioner of the DOT, and he says it's not perfect, but it's going to make it much harder for a governor or a legislature or an OPM to dip into the Special Transportation Fund going forward, assuming it passes. So there's a referendum coming up on that. But the question is, what do we do in the meantime? You know, we have a crisis that's happening now. It can't wait for the Special Transportation Fund to be padlocked. If the Special Transportation Fund is in the red, as we said, the governor cannot go to Wall Street looking for bonding. Our bond ratings already as a state have gone down. A+ in this case is not like really, really good. It's an A+. It's not like Illinois, but it's not as high as it used to be. And lower bond ratings means that when you issue bonds, you have to pay higher interest rates. So because the state's economy is somewhat precarious, bonding that we do issue is costing us more. So the way to fix the Special Transportation Fund is to find some new revenues, and that may come in the form of a fare increase, to cut expenses, which is to stop spending money on everything else, and I'll show you some slides on that, and maybe find some new different revenue sources that we're not using now. So these slides with the Connecticut DOT logo in the upper right-hand corner, these are straight from the DOT. This is not my stuff. Used with permission. They were told by the governor back in September, identify a way of saving money. And they came up with a 14% reduction in staffing at the DOT, stopping spending on maintenance. The rest area, did you notice the rest? I noticed the rest area driving up on 95. It's closed. Not the service areas, but the rest area. They're all closed now. They were manned, personed for a while with tourist information, etc. Now they're just permanently closed. Reducing maintenance staff will impact service levels for snow events and routine maintenance. The DOT commissioner had told me if we have a 2-day storm this winter, we are in real trouble. If you can't clear I-95 and the Post Road in the middle of a blizzard, what's that going to mean to all of the communities in this state? Bus impacts. They're looking at a 15% fare increase, cutting money, the subsidies that go to transit districts like the Nine Towns District by 15% or higher, reducing service by 5% going into 2021, and that brings us to what the impact would be on rail. 10% fare increase is proposed for July 1st, followed by an additional 5% the following year, another 5% the year after that. This is on top of what are already the highest commuter rail fares in the United States. On Metro North, the highest commuter rail fares in the United States. Not Shoreline East. Shoreline East is cheap by comparison, and I'll show you in a second more data on that. Try to save some money in non-revenue, non-service expense. Cutting service on the branch lines, except for morning and afternoon rush hour. No trains on the New Canaan branch, the Danbury branch, the Waterbury branch, and Shoreline East. So Shoreline East, which started, I think 20 years ago, as a directional service into New Haven in the morning and out in the evening, and has grown to almost a real, like 18-hour-a-day railroad, would be cut back completely to just rush hour service in the morning and rush hour service in the afternoon. There's a long list of bridge and highway projects that have been frozen. The one I highlighted in red was the I-95 widening of the Baldwin Bridge to the Gold Star Bridge. But there's pain all across the state, any number of different projects. The Mixmaster, where Route 8 intersects Interstate 84 in Waterbury, on hold. The I-84 Viaduct project in downtown Hartford, on hold. And there's more. We're getting some new cars for Metro North, an additional 19 cars. The thought was that we could take 10 of them and turn them into, they don't call them bar cars anymore, cafe cars. That won't happen. No new rail stations in Clinton, Orange, Merritt 7. No new parking garage in New Haven. No rehabilitation of the parking garage in Stamford. No pedestrian bridge in Stamford. Madison Railroad Station, no pedestrian bridge, no parking garage. Bridgeport Barnum Railroad Station that was going to be dropped into the East Bridgeport area. That won't happen. Costco Bridge repairs, nope. Branch improvements on the New Canaan branch, customer service initiatives. I mean, it's just a horrible list that was released by the DOT to meet the governor's mandate of you gotta stop spending if we're going to stop the Special Transportation Fund from going into the red. If that happens, the Special Transportation Fund will not go into the red, it will go down, but going out as far as 2022, there's still money in the fund. That's just by raising fares and cutting spending on transportation. Those are the two things that the DOT can control. They cannot control the gasoline tax, tolls, any other new revenue sources. That's up to the legislature. So what does it all mean? You'll love this. More traffic on I-95. Now, you don't like the traffic on I-95 as it is now, right? Come down to Lower Fairfield County, please. Come down to my end of the state. I'll show you traffic.
But imagine what a Friday afternoon looks like now on I-95. There are a lot of people that take the train as far as Old Saybrook, jump in a car and then drive from there. They're not going to be able to do that anymore. They're going to be in a car driving the whole way. Think about the people that don't have cars, who rely on buses and trains, the carless. These are the people that work in your stores, work at the gas station, clean your homes. How are they going to get to their jobs? And if they can't get to their jobs, what is that going to mean to you as an employer or to them in terms of trying to make a sustainable living? Less transit means that the towns that used to be served by transit are less desirable locations in which to live. A lot of the towns on the Main Line and on Shoreline East have been looking at transit-oriented development, using the trains as a way of enticing people to live in those communities, maybe without a car, because they're right across the street from a train station. Well, if the trains aren't running, how are you going to do that development? How are you going to live there? Real estate prices in those towns are going to go down. If they shut down branch line service to ritzy communities like Wilton and Ridgefield, what's that going to do to the value of the homes in those communities? It's going to send it down. So those values go down, but what doesn't go down? Taxes. You still got to pay for the schools, and if you can't tax at the rate, thanks to reapportionment and reevaluation, you're still going to have to raise that money. That means everyone's taxes will go up, even though the value of your home may be going down. The real issue that the DOT is concerned about is that once you cut service, is it possible to re-establish it if money is found? And that's a big if. And nobody at the DOT who's involved with transportation planning wants to cut service. I cannot remember in the 25 years that I've been engaged with Metro North and Shoreline East, I cannot remember any time there's been a reduction in service. Quite the opposite, there has been just more and more service added over the years. So this is uncharted territory. As I said, mass transit fares keep going up. Rail fares on Metro North have gone up 53% since the year 2000. Bus fares, have gone up 75%. Now, it's ironic that last night was the first in a several-week series of public hearings. Last night was in New Haven. I think the 28th is going to be in New London. 28th. So the DOT is going around the state, as they have to by law, to get people's thoughts on this whole idea of raising fares and cutting service. And I encourage you to go, even though I refer to these hearings as political theater. Because people go, and they rant, and they rave, and they scream, and they yell, and they say, because I've been to these things for all these times there's been a fare increase. It's the same people, it's the same kind of dialogue. They all say, that's it, I'm out of here, I'm leaving Connecticut, I can't afford it. Well, ironically, every time there's been a fare increase, ridership has gone up. Not gone down, gone up. Which speaks to how bad traffic is on I-95. So it's a very expensive proposition. And the question is, if you're looking to raise the fares and cut the service, that's like a double whammy. Let's talk about the branch lines. Why are they targeting the branch lines for these cuts instead of the main line? Well, running any railroad is very expensive. And on the main line between New Haven and New York, the deficit from the operation of that line is borne not just by Connecticut, it's shared by New York. The deal that Metro North and the MTA have with the state of Connecticut is Connecticut bears 1/3 of the cost of the deficit of the mainline operation in Connecticut, and Connecticut bears 1/3 of the deficit for the mainline operation in New York. So there's shared pain on the mainline. But on the branch lines, Waterbury, Danbury, New Canaan, Shoreline East, 100% of the deficit is borne by the state. And the branch lines are very expensive to operate. On the mainline trains, each passenger is subsidized to the tune of $3.25 per ride. That's on the mainline. On the New Canaan branch, it's $4.42. On the Danbury branch, $17. On the Waterbury branch, $24. Anybody want to guess what the subsidy per passenger per ride on Shoreline East is? Good guess. $49.52. Every time you buy a ticket on Shoreline East, which you probably think is pretty expensive, out of the Special Transportation Fund comes $49.52 to subsidize that ride to make up the difference. Why? Shoreline East is owned by the state of Connecticut. We hire Amtrak to run the trains. Their engineers, their conductors. Their tracks, too. 67 miles of track between New Haven and New London. 40 trains a day right now. As of December, 92% on time. Now, yes, they have been having some serious problems of late because they had a bunch of locomotives that they had to send off to get rehabilitated, and they haven't come back on time. So, I mean, every day my cell phone pings over and over again in rush hour, such and such a train on Shoreline East has been canceled, or it's delayed, etc., etc. But ridership on Shoreline East is actually down 6% year to date. Partly because the Q Bridge is done, and the increase in service on Shoreline East a few years ago was done because people knew the Q Bridge construction was going to make it really difficult to get into New Haven. So take the train. Well, bridge is done. It's beautiful. It's like, what, 8 lanes, one in each direction? It's great. Pretty lights at night and stuff. Gas prices are down, and service is not getting better on Shoreline East. 666,000 riders per year on Shoreline East compared to 39 million on the New Haven branch. So I know how to cut that deficit of $49.52 in half. Just double the ridership. If you had more passengers, the deficit wouldn't be as large. And if you can do something to attract people to take the train, Shoreline East will not be the attractive target for cuts as it is to the DOT. I got to tell you, there are folks down in my end of Fairfield County that are just screaming, $49.52. You know, I mean, when Roland came to office, he looked at the subsidy on the branch lines and said, shut them down. Let's buy everybody a car. We can buy everybody a car that takes that train. It'd be on the same highway as everybody else, but I don't think that's the answer. And clearly, ridership's not going to increase if you're cutting service. The fare box return on Shoreline East is 7%. On the main line, it's 70%. Another way of putting this is the subsidy on the Shoreline East is 93%, and on the main line, it's 30%. That's another way of saying we have the most expensive commuter rail, Metro North at least, the most expensive commuter fares in North America. Another way of saying that is that we have the lowest subsidy. Long Island Railroad subsidy is about 50%. MBTA in Boston, upper 30, 40 percentiles. Most mass transit commuter rail service is heavily subsidized as a way of attracting passengers, keeping the fares low, keeping cars off of the highway. Not in Connecticut. Because the people that live, especially in Fairfield County, and are trying to get to their job in New York City, what are they? They don't have any choice. There's no express bus. What are they going to do? Drive into New York City? Pay $50 a day for parking? So DOT knows they have a captive audience. From Fairfield County, the percentage of people going into New York City that take the train every day is in the upper mid 90 percentiles. There's a few people that have limos or take Uber or something, or they've got a dedicated parking space, but most people take the train. I mean, there are millionaires that, take Metro North. They wish they had the old private cars back, but that's a whole other story. Well, do the math. I did this myself. I had to go up to New Haven from where I live in Darien to do a TV show a couple weeks ago. And I said, I'm a Scott Cameron, I'm being thrifty. Am I going to take the train or should I drive? I did the math. Sanford to New Haven is about 43 miles. On Metro North, that'd be $8.25 one way, not including parking at the train station, and there's 2 trains an hour. If I drove, I don't drive a Tesla or anything, so I get about 20 miles to the gallon. It cost me maybe, 2 gallons of gas, $6. So $6 for gas as opposed to $8.25 for Metro North. I get to be in my own car, I get to smoke a cigar, I get to listen to the radio, I can come and go when I want to. I'm as selfish as the rest of you, okay? Of that $6 though, I paid 50 cents in gas tax. The guy in the Tesla next to me paid nothing because he doesn't pay for gas. So I had 50 cents, right? I know that I did more than 50 cents worth of damage to I-95 driving those 40 miles. Every time I hit a pothole, I made it a little bit bigger. Do you know what it costs to repair a pothole? It doesn't add up. People, through the gasoline tax, are not paying their fair share for the maintenance of our highways. How much damage does one car do to I-95 driving that distance? A lot more than 50 cents worth. So there's this perception that Connecticut has the highest gasoline taxes in the universe. No. Again, I remind you, the gasoline tax was lowered 14 cents a gallon 20 years ago. So take a look at these states. Look at the state, the motor fuel tax, and whether or not they have tolls. Starting with Connecticut. 25 cents a gallon, no tolls. Massachusetts, almost the same, but they have tolls. New Jersey, higher gas tax than Connecticut. They have tolls. Rhode Island, higher than Connecticut, and they got tolls. New York, just about the same as Connecticut, they got tolls. And how about Pennsylvania? Woo, 58 cents a gallon, and they have tolls. So they're not only trying to pay for their roads out of the gasoline tax, but by asking the people that drive on those roads to pay a small toll for that privilege. Now, is Donald Trump coming to the rescue with his infrastructure plan? His $1.5 trillion plan? If you look at the math, that's not the real number that he's proposing. He's only proposing $200 billion in federal spending. And, we just passed a tax cut, which has put our deficit up by $1 trillion. Do you think the Republican majority is going to want to add to that deficit another $1 trillion? The other money that he wants to spend on infrastructure is going to be spent by the states, and we don't have any money to spend. Or he wants to do what are called P3s, public-private partnerships. This is privatizing things like bridges, roadways, parking garages, etc. But what business is going to want to buy the rights to privatize I-95, and what kind of tolls would they charge? The Indiana Toll Road was privatized a few years ago, and the tolls tripled. Chicago privatized its street meter parking, and the rates went up 150%. There is no for-profit organization that's going to invest in what is basically a public service unless they can find a way of getting their pound of flesh.
Question for you?
Yes?
Pardon me. While you're on the section of public-private partnership, correct me if I'm wrong, the state of Connecticut, I've always been told that the Main Turnpike is a public-private partnership. Am I correct in that assumption?
I don't know for sure. I've never heard that it was.
I've been told by some authorities that it is. And I'm only giving you my experience of driving to Maine for 50 years on that highway. The tolls have gone up pretty consistently with the tolls in Massachusetts and New Hampshire. Okay. The condition of the roads up there, the entire infrastructure is very modern, very well. So I don't know if public-private but it's a very interesting subject that I think if it's managed correctly, I mean, they're making a profit too.
Right.
It has to be managed, but I'm always of the thought that private industries are much more efficient than managing things than governments are. So I don't really throw that out as a bad thing.
Well, I'm going to investigate that because
Yeah,
I had
I
not
appreciate
heard that before.
Yeah.
And, Maine, obviously, being covered with snow 10 months out of the year,
Yeah.
it's probably a very expensive road to maintain
Right.
and plow and make sure it doesn't have potholes as well, too. So I'm curious. I'm going to check on that. I think I might agree with you that private enterprise may be more cost efficient in the way that they run a business than the state is. There's been a recent study which came out by a group called the Reason Foundation, which is a libertarian think tank, which ranked Connecticut as, I think, 48th out of the 50 states in terms of the cost of what it takes to maintain its roadways. There's an article coming out this Sunday in the Hearst papers, and you'll probably see it maybe in the Day as well too, which I think debunks that. I think Connecticut DOT is, let's say, far from being cost efficient. I'm sure it's a very expensive operation, partly because of pensions we're paying for all those DOT employees after they finish their careers filling potholes, etc. But I don't think the numbers in that report are anywhere near accurate. So the question is...
Can I follow up on that?
Yeah, go ahead.
I came across that recently. And so they were saying that Connecticut, the administrative costs are $99,000 per mile,
Right,
whereas the national average is $11,000.
right.
And I mean, every state's different in what they have to do.
Well, I want to look at...
You're saying maybe those numbers aren't accurate. But
I want to look at the methodology of how they came up with those numbers. The DOT commissioner has questioned the methodology. There's another tab in that report, though. If you go to the Reason Foundation website, I mean, all the headlines have been, and I was as shocked as everyone. How could we possibly be spending $90,000+ per mile on our roadways?
that's administrative costs.
Well, administrative and maintenance as well too.
It's happened. It's happened.
But if you look at another tab which shows fatality rates, we're in the lower percentile. We're in the number five or number 6 in the country in terms of having low death rates. The very states that they identified as being uber expensive are the ones that are the safest, that people don't die of. And many of the states that they identified as having very low cost of operation are South Dakota, Montana, which have nowhere near our population or amount of traffic on their roadways. So I'm suspicious. When I was a journalist, I was always taught to be suspicious about what seems to be independent research. I mean, there are research groups out there that publish data as a way of moving the public debate as opposed to objectively analyzing things. So is it $90,000+ per mile? I don't think it could possibly be that high. Even if it's half as much, that seems very expensive. But if you look at those for mortality figures, the states that spend that money are the ones that have people that stay alive driving those roadways. And the states that spend less have a much higher mortality rate. Now, that may be because the speed limit in Montana is 85 miles an hour. I don't know. So it's hard to kind of do an apples-to-apples comparison. Infrastructure, as the White House is looking at it, is more than just roads and rails. We're talking airports. Yep.
But you didn't actually talk about the 25-cent gallon.
Oh, thank you.
That
was another thing that Trump has announced he's in support of, which is raising the federal gas tax, which has not changed, I think, since 1992 and has been static. So he wants to raise the federal gas tax before we even take a look at raising a gas tax in Connecticut. And again, infrastructure, if we're spending only $200 billion, we're spreading it across a lot of different issues. I mean, in Lower Fairfield County, where I live, the local water company had to put a pipeline along the Merritt Parkway because they didn't have enough water in their reservoirs to supply Greenwich. They had to pipe water down from Bridgeport. That's infrastructure. Our airports, the electric grid, the internet, as well as roads and rails as well too. So is there enough money to go around for all the things that we need out of, Uncle Sam? I don't think so. So what's the answer? You're not going to like any of this. I'm warning you up front. These are not my ideas. These were ideas that were created by a blue ribbon panel appointed by the governor when he came out with his $100 billion, 30-year, let's go CT dream. With no offense to the state rep who's here with us as well too. Over the years I've found that when, people can't make a decision, they study it. And they'll study it to death. And they don't want to have their fingerprints on anything that's going to be perceived as politically unpopular, like a tax increase or tolls. So the governor created this blue ribbon panel and said, okay, you guys figure out how we can come up with money to solve the transportation crisis. So if they suggest that, he can go, it's not my idea, this is the blue ribbon panel's idea. First of all, they suggested a lockbox on the special transportation fund, and you'll have a chance in November to vote on it. They also said, we've got to capture back that money that we gave away 20 years ago by raising the gasoline tax gradually, 2 cents a year for 7 years. That'll get us back to where we were in 1997. And gasoline prices are pretty low now. You might not notice. You'll notice, I'm sure. Increase the gross receipts tax on all petroleum by 1%. That's not going to raise your heating oil costs too much. They also looked at the idea of what's called a vehicle miles tax. This thing was dead on arrival. I mean, the Democrats shot this down before it was even explained. The idea of a vehicle miles tax, which is being used in Oregon, experimented with in California, is used in Europe, is everybody gets their odometer checked every year or two when they get their emissions tests done, right? So when you go in 2 years and they look at your odometer, they'll say, okay, you've driven 20,000 miles in 2 years, and multiply times factor of X, and they'll send you a bill for it. So the more you drive, the more you pay. Whether it's on the Post Road, or I-95, the Merritt Parkway, or whatever.
Or state of Maine.
Or going to the state of Maine, because the idea is, it wouldn't just be Connecticut that does this. This would be done in a regional compact. So Maine would do it as well too. Yeah, and we'd be collecting money from, people that are driving down here as well too. Highly unpopular. Oh yeah, Big Brother's going to be watching us. Oh, they're going to know where I went. Well, they know where you went. Your cell phone is telling you where they went. Your Easy Pass is being pinged even when there's not a toll. My column this week is called Big Brother's Along for the Ride. If you're paranoid about being watched by the government, this is the least of your worries. The traffic cameras on I-95, license plate readers on cars that track every time your car is passed, they store that data for years. The Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency is now contracted with a private company to maintain and get access to 2 years worth of license plate reading data. Police departments use it all the time to solve crimes. They know where you are. Your cell phone's displaying where you are at any given moment. I'm not worried about the National Security Agency or the FBI. Might be a little concerned about the state police, I don't know. Tolls, the T word. Yes, they suggested that we might look at the idea of putting tolls back on I-95. Again, nobody wants to pay more for what they're getting for free now. But we have to find some way of raising that revenue to repair those roads, to fill that deficit in the Special Transportation Fund. And while members of both parties will tell you that tolls are a tax, I am adamant in opposing that. Tolls are a user fee. They are not a tax. A user fee is paid by somebody who uses a particular service. If you don't want to drive, you won't be paying tolls. I mean, the train fares on Metro North are not a tax. Train fares on Metro North and Shoreline East are paid by people who take those trains. It's a user fee. And what could be fairer than asking people who use something, like our highways, to pay for the privilege of using it with variable pricing by time of day, because what we're looking to do is to manage the supply and demand. We have a limited supply of highway. If the demand is higher, fares, the tolls could be higher. We have peak and off-peak fares on Metro North. It costs you more to go see a movie on a Saturday night than it does on a Tuesday afternoon. We could keep the fares low. I mean, the George Washington Bridge is a perfect example. They've had time of day pricing for about 5-6 years now. If you want to drive on the George Washington Bridge at 8 o'clock on a weekday morning, it costs you more than driving across that bridge at 3 o'clock in the morning. And guess what that does? It defers those people that don't really need to be on the highway at 8 o'clock in the morning to a cheaper period of time of doing it. And truckers love them. They don't want to be in that traffic at 8 o'clock in the morning. They save money as well, too. Oh, we got to make sure that everybody other than ourselves pays these tolls. Let's just tax out-of-staters. Well, that's unconstitutional and illegal and immoral and unfair. Let's just put tolls at the borders. This was the suggestion of the chairman of the Transportation Committee, who lives in Rocky Hill, I think, right? Let's just get people that are passing through the state, let's count them at Greenwich and up near Westerly and be done with it. Of course, I won't have to pay the toll because I live in Rocky Hill. So I said, well, if you want to just capture the out-of-staters, why don't you put tolls on every bridge crossing the Connecticut River? That'll capture everybody up in Hartford coming in from the east and west, and I won't have to worry about that if I'm going down to Westchester County. You wouldn't like that here, I don't think. That'd be having a toll on that bridge over there. So the idea, I think, is yes, 34% of all the traffic on I-95 is people out of state. They're just passing through. But guess what the average distance of all motor vehicles on I-95 is driven in Connecticut? This includes people driving from Florida to Maine. And it includes you driving to Old Saybrook. What's the average distance driven by people on I-95 in Connecticut?
Per trip?
Per trip.
50 miles.
11 miles. 11 miles. I'm as guilty as the next guy. I get on at exit 10 and I get off at exit 11. I use it to go from one side of Darien to the other. Now, should I be doing that? Well, if I was going to pay a toll of 25 cents and it was really important to me to get to the other side of town 5 minutes faster, yeah, I do the math. Look at me, I did the math, I drove instead of taking the train, okay? Now, does this mean that if tolls come onto 95, everybody's going to go onto the post road to avoid the tolls? Well, maybe for the first 2 or 3 days. But then you're going to say, do I want to be stuck in traffic or do I want to get to work on time? There's a value that's received by having tolls on these roads. And no, we don't need to have toll barriers. The whole mishigas about, flaming truck crashes at the Stratford toll barrier, that's history. There are no more toll barriers. Drive across the Tappan Zee Bridge. I worked as a toll collector on the Tappan Zee Bridge for 3 summers when I was in college. I got really good at rolling quarters. Those toll booths are gone. It's all these gantries that are built up over the highway. They either read your Easy Pass or take a picture of your license plate and send you a bill. So there's no slowing down. Go to the Jersey Turnpike, take the Garden State, go up to the Mass Pike. You don't have to slow down to pay your toll. Again, we talked about time of day pricing to mitigate the traffic demand. And I argue that there is a benefit for a small cost that can be achieved by having tolls on the roads. There will be less traffic, the traffic will move more quickly, and you will get some benefit for the toll that you're paying. And here's a rhetorical question. Aren't we already paying tolls? If you can't read it, the sign says, "Welcome to Connecticut, tolls in effect. Blown tire, $200. Bent rim, $399. Damage to suspension, up to $2,000. You want to pay minus muffler? Or do you want to pay the state and get a better roadway? So I hope there was some light in there. I hope I've lit a fire and created some heat as well too. I'm happy to answer any questions, and I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts, and from Representative Carney as well, too.
Sure. I'll start.
Go ahead.
Thank you very much. That was very informative. I'd actually would love to have you talk to the Transportation Committee. I'm sure you've talked to them. Or some of the caucuses, because you do a much better job explaining the situation than the Department of Transportation does. The Department of Transportation came into my caucus to discuss this issue, and I think they actually lost support. So you did a much better job than them. But just a couple of comments and then a couple of questions for you. Just curious for your opinion. One, you didn't mention the gross receipts tax when calculating the gas tax in Connecticut. So I'm just kind of curious why. And because when you add that together, I think it does put Connecticut higher than some of those other states.
And what's the gross receipts tax down?
I think it's 8.81%.
Okay. That was an error on my part. I should probably have included that. I didn't include it in the other states' gasoline taxes by comparison. I'm not sure if they have a gross receipts tax or not, but it's just another way of, finding more revenue for the STF, Special Transportation Fund.
The other thing is, I'm just curious your thoughts. Tolls to me, I'm not fundamentally opposed to them, but the thing that concerns me is the DOT proposing 72 of them. I think that's too many, and there was actually the Yankee Institute did a report today that said would make us the most tolled state in the country if we implement those 72. I mean, I would like to see them, if they're going to do it, go about it, a little bit more tempered, and maybe just focus really on the highways like 95, 84, 91, maybe the Merritt and 395. But they're throwing in 9, 2, 11, 8, and those aren't, I don't know how much, especially on something like Route 11. I mean, there's not a lot of traffic on that road, and it's mostly in-state. So I'm just curious. I mean, what you think maybe an ideal number would be, because that commission, I don't know if I can't remember if they came up.
I think that was a Smith consulting group.
They did it with DOT, but the commission you were talking about, I know Cam Staples was on it.
Yeah, the finance, transport, transportation
remember
finance panel. I don't think they came up with any numbers per se. Now, when the Yankee Institute, which is a very conservative think tank, says Connecticut would be the most tolled state in the nation, does that ring true to you? Does that mean you're going to be paying the highest tolls, or we will be capturing tolls at the most locations? 72 is expensive because putting those gantries up ain't cheap. And I think the fairest way of doing it is to try to put tolls in the most locations you can, and put them in locations where people are not going to be able to deke off of I-95, go on the post road for 5 miles, get back on and avoid a toll. So I think the more tolling locations they have, the lower the toll would be at each location. The one interesting thing that the commissioner, Jim Redeker is the commissioner of the Department of Transportation, and I've worked with 5 or 6 DOT commissioners over the years, and this guy is good. He's really good. He's really smart. He's honest. He has a very tough boss, Porcupine, our governor. But I believe him when he says, when he tells me X or Y or Z. And I said, why would it take 2 to 4 years to implement tolls in Connecticut? And he said, well, you're not going to believe this. He said, but I called the feds. And I said, now, we're not doing tolls, but we don't have permission to do this. But if the legislature says, let's do tolls, what will be involved? Because I own the right-of-way. I own the highway. And we're just basically putting up something like a sign, if you put up a new sign that said exit 12, what's the big deal? You'll have to do an environmental impact study. An environmental impact study for putting up a pole over the road? Yes. So he said, this brought out the Donald Trump in me. He said, we got to drain this part of the swamp because there is no environmental impact to putting up a pole over the road with some electronics on it. The more places they put tolls, the more expensive it's going to be. But I think if we only had 5 or 6, that would attract people to try to detour around them. And it's up to the legislature to decide if you're going to toll where that's going to be. And I think, should it only be in Fairfield County? Should it only be on 95 and the Merritt? 91, Route 9? Well, I don't know, maybe. What about 86 from Hartford up to the Quiet Corner, up to Boston? Shouldn't there be a toll on that as well too? I think the fairest thing is to make everybody in the state pay a little bit and not make anybody feel that they're, like people in Fairfield County will always remind you, we pay 40% of all the taxes in this state. Greenwich and New Canaan alone pay 15% of the taxes in all this state. We can't pay any more. Well, yes, you can. You can pay more for the quality of life that you're enjoying. And the people that say, I love this. I went to, at our dump, we have a swap shop. You have a swap shop here? Oh, we have a swap shop. So if you have something you want to get rid of and it's still good, for the lamp, take the lamp down, don't just throw it in the dump. Take it down at the swap shop and leave it at the swap shop. And then if you see something, oh, another lamp, you can take it up and take it home. You just, if it's reusable and recyclable, don't throw it out, reuse it, recycle it. So I was down at the swap shop, and a young man I know was down there unloading his car. He lives at home with his parents. He's 3 years out of college. I said, wow, what's going on? You having a tag sale? He said, my parents are moving, which is, I guess, their way of saying it's time for you to get out of the house. They're leaving the state. Everybody is leaving Connecticut. Really? Well, did your parents sell their house? Oh, yeah. Well, I guess someone else is moving in. So I'm really tired of all of this Connecticut bashing, that there is some huge migration of people with brains and money who are leaving the state. Yes, there are some people who are leaving the state. They're moving to warmer climates or moving into the city because they choose to. But I don't think we've come to the point where the quality of our lives here is so good that we're being priced out of existence. So I think the question is, it's going to be the DOT's and the legislature's responsibility to decide how many tolls, what the cost will be, where they'll be located. Drive on the Garden State Parkway, and you'll not only see barrier tolls, but there are tolls at exits as well. So if you haven't paid a toll, if you're getting off at an exit just before there's a toll, you pay a toll there as well too.
And you kind of alluded to this. You were talking about it's up to the legislature to decide where the tolls are going to be and how much they're going to cost. But as I think your senator, Senator Duff, or
It's not my senator.
Oh, he's not Senator Leone.
I know.
Senator Duff has an idea to pass it on to a transportation authority. So I'm just curious as to your thoughts on that.
Well, again, if you don't want to have your fingerprints on a decision, let's create some other body, have them make the bad decision so you can blame them. I don't think we looked at the idea a decade ago about carving out of the Department of Transportation mass transit, rail and bus, because Connecticut was only one of 2 states in the country that ran its rail and bus out of its Department of Transportation, and that idea was rejected. I don't embrace that idea at all. I don't think that that's the solution, aside from creating another bureaucracy. Who would appoint the transit authority? It'll be interesting to see in the gubernatorial debates how this, issue comes up and how it's embraced. But no, I don't embrace that particular idea. Yes, sir.
Jim, just to go back to 2 points. One was on the Maine Turnpike Authority. While we were talking, my wife Googled it and she gave me the answer. The Maine Turnpike Authority is a quasi-state agency, privately owned. It was built and constructed with no state or federal money, so obviously it's private money. This happened in 1947, so there might be something there worth looking at. Back to Maine again on how and where to put tolls. Maine has a very unique way of handling tolls. If you get on exit 1 and drive to exit 2000 at the other end of Maine, you pay one rate for you on the entire Maine. But if you live in the urban area and you commute into the city, like if you work in Portland and you live in Westbrook, which is kind of area, right? It's where everyone goes. There's a reduced rate. There's a different rate for people. So, for instance, a person who would get on in Massachusetts and drive to New York would pay a much higher rate than I would pay if I drove from Old Lyme to Old Saybrook. it's based on population and so it's only fair, and it doesn't work there. So there are solutions, and I agree with you. If you use the road, all roads should be paid, and with today's technology, it is so simple.
Well, you raise an important issue, which I neglected to mention, which is border tolls are not legal. They are unconstitutional, violation of the Commerce Clause, but you can offer a discount to in-state residents.
Yeah.
So in this regard, that 34% of the traffic on I-95 that's coming from New York and going up to the Cape would be paying higher tolls than you might be doing the same drive or something less than that. Great.
Or not particularly suggesting it, but simply to say, if 30% of the revenue comes from out of state, 34%, whatever, it's an estimate, then simply, again, not supporting it, even if you're completely against tolls, or you're worried about more taxes in Connecticut, higher taxes, you're worried about the amount that we're paying, if you simply captured that 30% and then you took the other money and you offset other taxes. Say you support that. I'm not supporting it. But I'm saying simply take the other 2/3, reduce other taxes, then you can still support, you're essentially revenue neutral for tolling in the state. Of course it does, as with any fees or taxes, it's not entirely equal in how it's distributed. But then if you have your offsets, you can put your offsets into somehow accounting for that.
Right.
But essentially, and I want to, one more related question, but essentially if we're throwing away, was it 300, how many million would...
3.7 billion.
But how much would a 34% of this revenue, we're several $100 million. So that would just come into the state. Currently, it's somewhat about what our deficit is right now, I believe, isn't it? There's somewhat would be tolling. It's about there. A question: all these cut projects, are there any federal matches for these? Are we losing federal money by potentially canceling any of these projects? I know one of those projects up there on the board was a Tiger project, and so there were federal funds going into that, but I don't know if they'd be endangered.
I don't know how they're factoring that in. There are some projects that I know have federal money, like the rebuilding of the Walk Bridge, the swing bridge in South Norwalk, that dates from the Victorian era and hasn't been closing, so the trains can't go across it. That project's going forward. That has federal money. The new Hartford line from New Haven, the commuter line to Hartford and beyond to Springfield, that's going forward because that has a lot of federal money. I get the sense from the commissioner that he's not imperiling projects that have federal money because it's either, in process and has to be completed, or imperils that federal money ever being retrieved if the project did get to go forward. Now, in the back of your mind, you're saying, well, it can't possibly be this bad, Jim. This is just the governor. He's calling bluff on the legislature. He's not possibly going to do all these things, is he? He seems to be moving forward with it. I mean, the fare increase hearings are started. They're making those overtures. But I think, in a way, and I don't want to politicize this, because this is not a Republican or a Democratic issue. I'm unaffiliated. I'm running for nothing except the train occasionally. So I have no political motivations in saying this. But I think Dale Malloy is so pissed at the legislature for having, both parties, for having dismissed him as being irrelevant. I mean, even his own party said, you're not getting involved with the budget process. That he's, in a way, delighting in holding representatives' feet to the fire in an election year by spreading this pain so widely so that every part of the state is going to lose something, some highway construction, train service, whatever it is. So I don't know if you've been getting phone calls or emails or nasty grams, but I guess that's really his intention, which is to pressure the legislature into doing something. Now, what's going to happen? Here's what I think is going to happen. You don't have to do this, but this is what I think is going to happen. I think the easiest things, one of the things I didn't mention was, when you buy a new car, there is money which is collected as a tax, which has gone into the general fund. And that in 2021 was going to be diverted to the Special Transportation Fund. Well, that can be diverted next year. So that's not a new tax, you're still paying those taxes, but instead of putting it into the general fund in the hopper, put it into the Special Transportation Fund. That's easy. I think raising the gasoline tax a little bit, that's relatively easy because prices are still pretty low compared to what they've been in the past few years. Gross receipts tax, I mean, you'll probably never see that or feel that, I don't know what you pay to heat your house, but, the oil truck comes to my house and fills the tank and I get a $400 bill a few times every winter. If it's going to be $410, what am I going to do? Say no? Or I don't know where that money goes. So I think that's another easy one to do. I think tolling is going to be much harder, and I think that's probably going to be a decision that'll be, held off. I don't think that we need to study tolling again. The DOT has been doing a tolling study for a couple of years, and I think that'll probably be ready and come out with some data that the legislature can use. But I think the legislature is going to have to deal with this. And the fact that it's in an election year, well, certain irony in that, but you're going to have to explain to your constituents whether you're going to support a gas tax or a toll increase or allow these projects to just go on hold. Other questions? Yes, sir.
So, assessing the fee per mileage seems very fair in terms of if you pay for the number of miles you use.
Yeah.
So, what's been the experience in other, like in Oregon, where they apply that? And then the downside does seem to be out-of-state traffic, which would not be able to pay into that. So is there a way to work around that?
Well, not unless all the other states do the same thing and there's some sort of reciprocity. So that if you're driving up to Maine, you'll pay a vehicle miles tax on those miles, but that guy from Maine who's driving down here or driving through the state, he'll be paying a vehicle miles tax as well too, so that'll kind of be a wash. From what I understand, the experience in Oregon has been quite good. They're not as paranoid about, the big brother knowing where I've driven. They don't care where you've driven. They just care how many miles you've driven. But what really pained me was that this idea came out of this transportation finance blue ribbon panel, and you mentioned Senator Duff, the Senate majority leader. Well, he's not majority, co-majority leader now. But the big cheese of the Democratic Party in the Senate, same party as the governor, said, no way, we're not even going to discuss this. Well, could we at least explain it? Could we talk about it? Could we answer questions like about what happens if I drive to California? Am I going to be paying a tax on that? Nope, not even to discuss it. That bothers me, that there is so little kind of intellectual curiosity on what some of the other alternatives might be. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I live in New London, and I like using Shoreline East. My grandkids live in Greenwich, so we take the train when we can. But I did experience sticker shock looking at the subsidy rate for Shoreline East. And one of the problems is that the frequency of the Shoreline East trains is not good. So especially on weekends, sometimes we do take the train from New Haven or even drive the whole way, because you can take a train at 7 or at 9 and that's it to get home. So if we want to increase ridership, how do we do that? How do we get out of that conundrum of, there's too much of a subsidy to add lines, but you can't get more people to ride the train unless you have more convenient times.
But I think you make the assumption that that's what we're discussing, how to increase ridership. No, we're talking about cutting service at this point. There are ways
that will make it worse.
There are ways, that would certainly make it worse. There are certainly ways, I think, if in a perfect world without this sort of Damocles hanging over our head, to improve service on Shoreline East, to add more trains. For example, on Metro North, outside of rush hour, well, where I live, I live in Darien. In rush hour, there are trains every 20 minutes in and out of the city. In off-peak hours, from like 10 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon. There used to be only one train an hour between Darien and New Haven. A few years ago, the governor increased that. There are now 2 trains an hour. Ridership went up. Now, costs went up also because you needed to have more equipment and need more crews, etc. And that's why I say it's very expensive to operate a train. So you could, if you had more equipment, have a greater frequency. But that's the question. Is the question, are people not taking Shoreline East because of the inconvenience of the schedule? Or because it's still too expensive, even though it's cheaper than Metro North is? You know,
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know.
Senior citizens cheap.
Oh, okay, so I'm a senior citizen too. We get 50% discount, so
We have-
I never thought I'd see that day, but yeah, I get that too.
The weekend cuts seem really absurd. On weekends in the summertime, the Shoreline East and Metro North, they are filled.
Yep.
And people use them to get it all along the shoreline.
Yep.
So if they cut those, there's going to be traffic, and the traffic is already horrendous, as you know.
Yep.
So it just doesn't seem to
And
make
what's it
a lot
gonna
of
mean, what's it gonna mean to summer rentals along the coast? My wife and I drove along Route 146 from East Haven all the way up to Westbrook today. We took our time. It was kind of foggy, but it was beautiful, and it was close.
Pretty rough.
Beautiful road, and close to the train tracks. I was hoping I'd see a train, didn't see a train. And all those houses along there were obviously
That's right.
expensive summer rentals. Well, if I can't get from my Manhattan penthouse to my shore villa in Guilford on Shoreline East, and I gotta get in a car and drive it, maybe I'll go to the Hamptons instead.
It doesn't make sense.
I know it doesn't make sense. So, here's your statement. Talk to them. What do you do at this point? I mean, you obviously have to talk to your elected officials. I mean, one of the reasons I left the official Metro North Commuter Rail Council was, well, first of all, you'd be interested in this. You're recording this. I won't name names. I was threatened by a senior member of the Democratic Party for being critical of the governor. He said, stop criticizing the governor. I said, you loved me when I was criticizing Rel and Roland. This is not a partisan issue. I'm criticizing because he's not paying attention to the issue. He said to me, you know, if you keep this up, we will write your little commuter council out of existence. And they tried to. They slipped a bill in the hopper that would have completely eliminated the commuter council. We caught that. Tony Wang got involved. We saved it. It was remorphed into something else, but it didn't have any kind of responsibility or clout, so I left. It was clear that the commuter council wasn't getting things done. So I started this new group, the Commuter Action Group, and I said, the idea is to empower you as commuters. You know, if you see something that's wrong on the train, if there's something not happening at the platform, don't call Metro North, don't call the DOT, call your state rep. If he makes a call to Metro North of the DOT, things will happen. So, you know, we have a website, we have an email page, you can click, you can find the email address for your state rep from a directory. If you don't know who it is, send them an email. You know, speak up. The idea is, what are you going to do? Get off the train in New York City and go to your office and pull out a quill pen and craft a letter of complaint? No, pull out your smartphone and send an email while you're on the train. Take a picture of the problem. Take a picture of that conductor sitting in his cab and nodding off instead of collecting tickets. Document it, you know? Use the technology to empower those kind of complaints. But I digress. You were saying something, and I hope I answered your question. Anyone else have a question? Yes, sir.
So I don't use public transportation much, but I do support mass transit. But I was shocked at the subsidies that have to be paid. And, you know, what is the realistic subsidy that the state should be putting towards these fares? $49 a ticket.
I don't have a dollar number for you, but let's see what happens if Shoreline East isn't running on Friday afternoons, and what that does to traffic on 995 and to the value of your summer rental in Guilford. And then tell me, you know, is $49 too much? I mean, it is a very expensive railroad to operate. If we do something to get the ridership back up, that would, I think, help keep the subsidy down. Oh, here's another idea. I know how to cut traffic on I-95 by 50%. How do you do that, Jim? Carpool. Everybody gets 2 people in their car. She's laughing. Of course I'm not going to do that, Jim. I want to be able to smoke my cigar and listen to the radio and, roll down the window and curse at the trucks. I mean, that's another form of mass transit, encouraging people to take more than themselves and 2 tons of steel to their destination. Spread that agony across a few more people in the same car. I'm full of good ideas that nobody likes. It's just hard to sell them all. Maybe 2 more questions and then we'll wrap it up. I appreciate you coming out tonight. Greg.
Just to say that, there's a temptation in the present politics for everything to be partisan. And certainly when we talk about revenues and spending, necessarily there's, and this is painful. No one in their right mind wants to make these decisions, cuts or revenue or any of it. But I will say that if you look sort of beneath the politics and what staffers and what various organizations are saying, just today, for example, the Trump White House said, hey, there's this program in Oregon that has they were just floating that today, and they floated both verbally and in a report. So this was sort of an odd kind of bipartisan sort of thing. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the Trump White House have both floated this 25-cent tax for gasoline tax. Of course, now if you add 14 cents and 25 cents, you really see that Connecticut is going to get squeezed in that fashion, or it makes it less likely. Tolling to make it easier and quicker, the Trump administration was proposing in the latest infrastructure plan a streamlining that would make it potentially easier to toll on federal interstates. And while I look at the Trump infrastructure plan with a jaundiced eye in terms of projects and spending, in terms of streamlining and regulatory changes, many of those proposals actually have bipartisan support. And if it frankly didn't help one party, or one party couldn't take credit for it, or the other, they would probably pass some of this if they could actually get along. So there's something, even though, and Shoreline East, I agree, I look at $49 and I say, okay, cut us. But then the truth is, we cut Shoreline East, get rid of it, we still have the same, that's just a piece of this budget issue that we have. We'll still have to make some of these tough decisions that just purely cuts don't seem to be able to handle, even if you're feeling draconian.
I mean, we're not even talking about some of Governor Malloy's, I'll say it, rather grandiose ideas for his Let's Go CT $100 billion 30-year plan. We're basically talking about maintaining a state of good repair, keeping the bridges from falling down. By the way, there are any number of objective engineering groups that come out with report cards every year that rank our bridges as way down near the bottom. Because we have a lot of them. There's a lot of rivers around here as well too. Remember the Mianus River Bridge collapse 35 years ago? When Hartford said, let's save money on not repairing bridges, and a chunk of I-95 in Greenwich just went boom. Truck drove off, cars drove off, people died. I mean, I don't think we're going to see that, but actually the commissioner has referred to this as a Mianus moment. It's one of these decision times where we have to get serious with ourselves. Either we defer all this maintenance and end up needing a realignment every time we drive on the highway or these bridges collapse, or we do something which will not be popular. Any one of these ideas is going to be unpopular, but they may be necessary or they may be at least logical. Any final question? If not, I will thank my hosts for inviting me, invite you to pick up one of my cards. If you'd like a copy of this PowerPoint, just shoot me an email. I'd be glad to send you a copy. And if you want to join the Commuter Action Group, just send me your name and your hometown, and I'll put you on the list as well, too. So thank you so much for coming out on a Wednesday evening and attending this and having a lively discussion as well, too. And thanks for having me.
Thank you.
And I would like to thank Jim for coming out. I just want to make two comments. One, I think people need to understand that transportation is the heart of what we're able to accomplish in all of our communities. Our businesses rely on it, our ability to educate people. We cannot do without transportation. And just to make it important to our community, when we don't have the transportation funds, we miss out on opportunities. The town of Old Lyme has to replace a bridge in Old Lyme. And we have to do it in the next couple of years. And normally, we would qualify for local bridge funding, which would help to pay for somewhere between 45 and 48%. For the third year in a row, the local bridge funding is not going to be funded. That means that we pay 100%. It's a $600,000 cost. That is not chump change. That means that, and we don't have a choice in that. We can't not repair or replace this bridge. So, and we have to do it whether or not that funding is there. So it does impact us when we have this, and I think that you make some very good points. I agree with you, Devin. The explanation was far clearer than the commissioner was able to convey to us at a couple of presentations we went to. So, and I want to acknowledge Selectwoman Nozel for suggesting having you come out here. It was well worth our time, and I thank you all and you for your presentation.